An experienced pilot takes control of a transoceanic flight when, without warning, the automated systems begin waging a deadly battle against the crew. Within seconds, the onboard computer decides to plunge the aircraft toward the ocean, ignoring all human commands. With 143 lives on board and only moments to react, he must face the machine that was supposed to protect them to prevent a tragedy that would mark aviation forever. You know that moment when you realize something is terribly wrong, but your brain hasn't fully processed the danger yet. When every second feels like an eternity, and your hands act on instinct before your mind even comprehends the gravity of the situation. I lived through that, and if you're here to understand how a pilot fights against his own aircraft while 143 people blindly trust his decisions, you're in the right place. What I'm about to tell you forever changed how I view technology in aviation. It was almost 2 in the morning when I took the controls. The flight had been proceeding with absolute normalcy for nearly 6 hours. We departed from a major international airport bound for the East Coast, crossing the ocean beneath a starlit sky that looked like a blanket of black diamonds. I'd been in aviation for 17 years, with over 12,000 flight hours logged. My co-pilot, an equally experienced professional, had just gotten up for a technical break. It was my turn to command that Boeing 737-800 cutting through the night at 36,000 feet. Inside the cockpit, the gentle hum of the engines created that hypnotic atmosphere every pilot knows well. The panel lights glowed in shades of green and blue, the digital displays showing precise information about every aircraft system. Everything was working in perfect harmony. Behind me, in the passenger cabin, 189 people were sleeping, reading, watching movies, or simply gazing at the dark emptiness outside. Families returning home, business executives on trips, couples on their honeymoon. Each one with their dreams, their plans, their entire lives ahead of them. The autopilot was engaged, as is standard on long-distance flights. I monitored the instruments with the relaxed attention of someone who trusts the systems, but never completely lets down their guard. I periodically checked our route, speed, altitude, fuel consumption, numbers that danced gently on the screens, telling the story of a perfectly normal flight. The air conditioning breeze maintained the ideal temperature in the cockpit. I took a sip of coffee that was already starting to cool. Just another night of work, like so many others. Or at least that's what I thought. The first sign was so subtle it almost went unnoticed. A slight bump. Nothing dramatic. The kind of minor turbulence that happens dozens of times on any flight. But something in me, that instinct that only develops with thousands of hours in the air, triggered a quiet alert. I looked at the instruments. Everything normal. Stable altitude, constant speed, correct pitch. I took a deep breath, wondering if I wasn't just too tired after an intense rotation of flights. Then it happened. A sharp beep cut through the cockpit silence. My eyes immediately swept the panel. The artificial horizon, that crucial instrument showing the aircraft's attitude, began displaying a reading that made my blood run cold. The aircraft was indicating an impossible pitch angle, but I could feel through the controls, through the balance of my own body, that we were still level. It was as if the airplane's senses had gone crazy. "What the hell?" I murmured, leaning forward, trying to understand what I was seeing. I didn't have time to complete the thought. Suddenly, the yoke, that wheel controlling the plane, was ripped from my hands with brutal force. It wasn't a gradual sensation. It was as if an invisible giant had grabbed the controls and pushed forward with all its strength. The aircraft's nose dove violently toward the invisible ocean below. The change was so sudden, so unnatural, that for a fraction of a second my brain simply refused to accept what was happening. The negative G-force threw me against the seatbelt. Objects that were loose began to float. Pens, papers, the water bottle. In the passenger cabin I heard the first screams. That sound no pilot ever wants to hear. Pure terror. "What's happening?" I shouted to myself, grabbing the yoke with both hands and pulling with all my strength. The aircraft didn't respond. Absolutely nothing. It was like trying to move a mountain. The autopilot had taken control and was determined to kill us. The alarms began cascading. Beeps, sirens, red lights flashing across the entire panel. "Altitude! Heltitude!" screamed the ground proximity warning system. The airspeed indicator was spinning wildly. We were in free fall, accelerating every second. 36,000 feet. 33,000, 31,000. The descent rate was nearly 10,000 feet per minute. Simple, terrifying math. We had less than 3 minutes before hitting the ocean. My training took over. Years of simulators, emergency procedures memorized until they became instinct. But this was different. This was something I'd never faced. The plane was fighting me. It wasn't a simple mechanical failure. It was the onboard computer itself, that sophisticated system designed to protect us, that had become our enemy. "Disconnect autopilot," I roared, even though I was alone. My right hand flew to the disconnect button. I pressed once, twice, 3 times, nothing. The damn system wouldn't turn off. It kept pushing the nose down with increasing force. I felt the aircraft's structure groaning around me, the rivets protesting against forces they weren't designed for. 26,000 feet. The speed was exceeding safe limits. The wings were starting to shake. If we continued like this, the aircraft's structure itself might not hold. I wasn't just fighting the fall, I was fighting time, physics, the plane itself. Behind me, the cockpit door burst open violently. My co-pilot practically threw himself inside, still adjusting his uniform, his face pale as he realized the catastrophic situation. "What do we have?" he shouted over the alarms. "The autopilot's gone crazy, I can't disconnect it. We're in an uncontrollable dive." He threw himself into the seat beside me, the seatbelt barely fastened, and also grabbed the controls. 2 experienced pilots, using all the strength in our arms and shoulders, desperately trying to pull the aircraft's nose up. It was like fighting an invisible adversary infinitely stronger. 23,000 feet. "Circuit breakers," I shouted. It was the last card. If we couldn't shut off the autopilot through normal means, we'd have to cut its power completely. My co-pilot understood immediately. His hands flew to the panel above our heads, where dozens of small black buttons controlled every electrical system in the aircraft. He began pulling them frantically, cutting power to everything that wasn't absolutely essential. "Which one?" he shouted, desperate. There were so many circuit breakers. Choosing the wrong one could leave us with no control at all. Choosing right could save us. 21,500 feet. Less than 2 minutes to impact. My mind was working at frantic speed. I visualized the aircraft's electrical diagram, those endless hours studying technical manuals in freezing classrooms. "Flight control computer." "Panel 3, row 2, I yelled, not even absolutely certain he found it. Pulled hard. And for 1 second, one single terrible and long second, nothing happened. Then I felt it. A subtle change in the yoke's resistance. The plane had become ours again. The monstrous pressure pushing the controls down vanished as if it had never existed. "Now!" I bellowed, and we pulled together with all the strength still left in our already aching arms. The aircraft's nose began to rise. Slowly, painfully slowly, the structure groaned and protested. The wings flexed in ways they should never flex. The positive G-forces now pushed us against the seats, blood draining from our heads, vision beginning to darken at the edges. 20,000 feet. The speed was still brutal, but the descent angle was decreasing. 19,000 feet. It wasn't enough. We were still falling too fast. "Come on, come on, come on," I whispered through clenched teeth, every muscle in my body tense to the maximum. I visualized the ocean below, invisible in the darkness, but very real, very solid, very lethal. 18,000 feet. The nose kept rising. Painful degree by painful degree. The descent rate decreasing, 6,500 feet per minute, 5,000, 3,000. But would it be enough? Did we have enough altitude to complete the recovery? The aircraft vibrated like a wounded animal. Every inch of structure protested against what we were doing. I could hear objects falling in the passenger cabin, screams piercing through to our armored cockpit. Part of me, the part still capable of thinking beyond the immediate fight for survival, imagined the absolute terror those 189 people were feeling. They didn't know what was happening. They only knew the plane was diving toward death, 6,500 feet. The altimeter was still spinning in the wrong direction, but slower now. With each passing second, we gained a bit more control. The nose rose another degree, the fall became less vertical. My arms burned as if they were on fire. The co-pilot beside me grunted with effort, his face red, veins bulging in his neck. "It's working," he managed to say between short breaths. Keep going, keep going." 16,000 feet. And then Like a miracle defying all odds, as if God or fate or pure luck had decided it wasn't our time yet, the altimeter stopped falling. For one interminable second, it simply stopped, and then, so slowly it almost seemed like imagination, it began to rise. 16,000 feet, 16 to 100, 16 to 300. We were leveling off. We were alive. The relief that swept through my body was so intense, it almost made me pass out. But I couldn't. Not yet. I kept the controls steady, guiding the aircraft back to normal attitude, checking every instrument with hands that trembled uncontrollably. The speed was too high. We needed to decelerate gradually to avoid further stressing the already stressed structure. "Systems check," I managed to say, my voice coming out hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "We need to know what we've got working." While my co-pilot began methodically checking each system, I finally had a moment to process what had just happened. We'd fallen almost 20,000 feet in less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. 3 minutes that separated life from death for 191 people. I tasted metal in my mouth and realized I'd bitten my lip so hard it was bleeding. My hands still gripped the yoke like claws, fingers white from tension. I forced myself to relax them, one finger at a time. They hurt as if they'd been crushed. "Hydraulic systems checked," the co-pilot recited, his voice regaining professional stability, though still trembling at the edges. "Engines operating normally, thank God. Fuel within parameters. Flight controls responding. But we need to keep it manual. We can't trust the autopilot." "Agreed," I responded, though the idea of flying manually for several hours, with fatigue already gnawing at me, was almost as terrifying as the dive we'd just survived. But there was no choice. That system had tried to kill us. We wouldn't give it a second chance. Behind us, I heard the lead flight attendant's voice on the intercom trying to sound calm but failing miserably. "Cockpit, we have multiple injured in the cabin. Nothing serious apparently, but we need guidance. The passengers are panicking. What should I tell them?" What to say? How to explain that the computer controlling their lives suddenly decided everyone should die? How to reassure people who just felt death brush their shoulders? I took a deep breath, choosing each word carefully. Tell them we encountered unexpected severe turbulence, that the situation is under control now, that we're assessing our options and will inform them shortly. Keep everyone seated with belts fastened until further notice. It was a lie, but it was a necessary lie. The truth, that the plane itself had turned against us, would cause chaos we might not be able to control. "We need to declare an emergency," said my co-pilot, already adjusting radio frequencies, "and decide where we're going. We can't continue to the original destination like this." He was right. We checked our map, calculating distances. There was a military airport about 500 miles away on the coast. Long runways, prepared to receive any kind of emergency. It was our best option. In the following minutes, while coordinating with air traffic control, declaring an emergency and receiving absolute priority for landing, my mind kept reliving those 8 seconds. 8 seconds. That's all it took from the first sign something was wrong until we were in a death dive. 8 seconds to go from a routine flight to a desperate fight for survival, if I had hesitated. If my co-pilot hadn't returned at exactly that moment. If we hadn't found the right circuit breaker. If we'd taken 2-3 more seconds to initiate recovery. 8 seconds was all that separated those 189 people from their families, or from a mass funeral that would shock the world. My hands kept trembling as I guided the plane through the night, now absolutely focused, trusting nothing but my own senses and the manual controls. Behind me, I heard the muffled murmurs of passengers, some crying, others praying. The lead flight attendant and her crew were doing heroic work keeping everyone calm, checking injuries, distributing water. The ocean below remained invisible, a dark and silent threat that almost swallowed us. I thought about all the times I'd crossed these same waters, blindly trusting automated systems, barely touching the controls for hours on end. How could we trust again? How could any pilot? Later we would discover that a faulty sensor had sent false data to the onboard computer. And that computer, programmed to protect the aircraft, interpreted that data as evidence we were in a stall, that deadly condition where the plane loses lift. Its programmed response was to push the nose down, gain speed, recover flight. A perfectly logical response, perfectly rational, and absolutely wrong because the problem wasn't real. The machine tried to save us from an imaginary danger and nearly killed us in the process. The final approach to the military airport was the longest of my life. Every minute seemed to drag on for hours. I kept the aircraft in smooth, controlled descent, refusing to trust any automated system. It was me, the controls, and that 60-ton piece of metal carrying 189 souls. The runway lights finally appeared on the horizon like beacons of hope. Never had a sight been so welcome. I aligned manually, checking and rechecking each parameter. Speed, approach angle, flaps extended, landing gear down and locked. Each check done 2-3 times. There could be no errors now, not after we'd come so close to death and managed to escape. 1,000 feet, announced my co-pilot, his voice finally steady again. Speed good. Descent good. You're flying perfect. 500 feet. The runway lights grew, transforming from points into brilliant lines. I could see the fire trucks lined up, ready for any eventuality, ambulances waiting. The entire emergency apparatus mobilized to receive us. 100 feet, 50, 30. I gently pulled the yoke to round out the descent. I felt the slight bump when the main wheels touched the concrete. The most beautiful bump in the world. The screech of tires, the deceleration, the reversers roaring, the brakes doing their job. We were on the ground. We were safe. Only when the plane finally stopped, engines still at idle, did I let my body relax. Every muscle seemed to shut down simultaneously, as if it had been held in tension by pure willpower, and now finally could rest. My hands were still shaking when I took them off the controls. I looked at my co-pilot. He was pale, eyes red, but there was a weak smile on his face, a smile of pure gratitude for being alive. Good job, I managed to say, my voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. You too, he replied, and then, without any warning, he started to laugh. A nervous laugh, almost hysterical, the kind of laughter that comes when your brain is still processing that you should be dead but aren't. I couldn't help it. I laughed with him, tears in my eyes, the relief finally breaking through the barrier I'd maintained during those hellish minutes. The evacuation was quick and orderly. No serious injuries, miraculously. Some bruises, a twisted arm, a lot of psychological trauma that would take time to heal. But everyone alive, everyone breathing, everyone able to hug their families again. I was the last to leave the aircraft, as protocol dictates. Before leaving, I stood for a moment in the empty cockpit, looking at that panel that almost became our coffin. The instruments now silent, lights still blinking softly. A magnificent machine, the fruit of decades of engineering and innovation, but still a machine, capable of errors, capable of failures, capable of decisions a human mind would never make. I placed my hand on the yoke one last time, feeling the cold metal under my fingers. Thanks for not killing us, I whispered, half joking, half serious. And then I left, leaving behind the aircraft that would forever carry the invisible scars of that night. In the following months, investigations revealed the exact sequence of failures, the faulty angle of attack sensor, the computer programming that couldn't identify contradictory data, the difficulty in manually disconnecting the system, each piece of the puzzle being meticulously analyzed. Recommendations were made, systems were reprogrammed, protocols were revised, but no investigation, no technical report could fully capture what we lived through that night. The absolute terror of feeling the plane ripped from your hands, the helplessness of fighting an invisible and seemingly invincible force, the decision to cut power to critical systems without being certain of the result, the overwhelming relief when the nose finally began to rise. I returned to flying 3 months later, after the mandatory rest period and psychological evaluation. The first time I sat in a cockpit again, I felt my heart race. Cold sweat ran down my back when I activated the autopilot for the first time. But I did it, because this is my profession, because I love flying, because those 189 people needed someone who knew that even when technology fails, there's always the human factor. Experience, instinct, the determination not to give up even when every alarm is screaming you're going to die. Today, 17 years have passed since that night. I've accumulated thousands of additional flight hours, trained dozens of co-pilots, participated in safety reviews, but never, not for a second, have I forgotten those 8 seconds. 8 seconds that changed everything. 8 seconds where 143 passengers and we, the crew, were on the tightrope between life and death. It wasn't 143 dead, it was 143 lives saved by seconds. I learned that technology is a magnificent tool, but that's all it is, a tool. It should never completely replace human judgment. It should never have the absolute final word on life and death. And when it fails, as everything eventually fails, we need to be prepared to take over, to fight to make the impossible happen. Every time I push the throttle for takeoff, when I feel that familiar push pressing me against the seat, when the nose lifts and the wheels leave the ground, I carry with me the memory of that night. Not as a trauma that paralyzes me, but as a reminder of what we're capable of when everything's at stake, of what it means to be truly responsible for every life entrusted to your care. Because in the end, when all systems fail, when technology turns against you, when there seems to be no possible way out, there's still one thing that can make the difference. The skill of an experienced pilot, the right hands on the controls, the refusal to accept defeat even when it seems inevitable, and 8 seconds to prove that sometimes the impossible is just something that hasn't been done yet. Those 189 passengers don't know my name. They don't know the technical details of what happened. For many, it was just a flight with severe turbulence that ended in an emergency landing. A story to tell, perhaps, but nothing that stays with them forever. But I know, and my co-pilot knows, and every aviation professional who read the report knows, that night, over a dark and indifferent ocean, 191 lives hung by a thread thinner than a hair, and they didn't fall. Because when the moment of truth came, when the computer decided it was our end, 2 pilots with decades of experience between them said, "Not today." And then we fought against the plane itself, against gravity, against time, and against all odds, and we won. So the next time you board a plane and see the pilots doing their pre-flight checks, looking bored with the routine, remember, it's exactly that routine, that experience, that training repeated thousands of times that prepares them for the day when, maybe, just maybe, they'll have 8 seconds to save your life and you'll want them to be ready. If you made it this far in this story that almost ended in tragedy, but became a testament to human capacity to overcome the impossible, subscribe to the Black Box channel. Share with someone who needs to know that even in the skies, it's people, not machines, who make the real difference.